Welcome to Strange History, where we explore the weird and the wonderful history that has shaped the world into what it is today. Strange History is proudly part of the Darkcast podcast network hosted on Spreaker. Go check out all the amazing podcasts there. Today, we will be talking about my favorite food group, coffee. You can't talk about coffee without talking about Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has some amazing history that is key to the world's history. So not only do they produce some pretty amazing coffee, but they are rich in history. First founded in 980 BC, Ethiopia is the oldest independent country in Africa. It is also the second most populated country in Africa with a population of over 106 million people, making it second to Nigeria. Ethiopia also stands as the only African country that has never been colonized. Ethiopia is the only country that actually works on a 12-hour time system. Ethiopia does not observe daylight savings time. The daytime cycle begins at dawn, which is 6 a.m., and ends at dusk, which is 5:59 p.m. The nighttime cycle begins at dusk, which is 6 p.m., and ends at dawn, which is 5:59 a.m. Let's get back to coffee, one of my favorite subjects and is a main staple of my diet. Coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia, so you can say it is the creation place of the popular brew. It is confirmed that coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia and moved around the world through slave trading and other means. There are several accounts of exactly how it was discovered. One account is that a 9th century goat herder in Ethiopia noticed how energized his goats became whenever they fed from a certain bush. This led him to try and chew on the fruit from the bush himself. He took these fruits to a monastery, and a monk threw them into the fire. The enticing aroma attracted other monks, and the fruit was dissolved into hot water, yielding the world's first cup of coffee. Another fact about Ethiopia, the history of the Rastafari can be traced back to Africa through the movement that was started and developed in Jamaica. The word Rastafarian is derived from Ras, meaning chief in Ethiopia's official language, Amharic, and Tafari, the first name of former Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. He was also the spiritual leader of the Rastafarians, who was believed to be an incarnation of God. When coffee was first discovered, Arab Sufi monks used the beverage for a similar purpose that people drink it today, to get a boost and to stay awake. Their goal back then, to reach divine consciousness in midnight prayers. The word coffee has roots in several different languages. In Yemen, it earned the name gawa, which was originally a romantic term for wine. It later became the Turkish kava, and then Dutch coffee, and finally coffee in English. The modern version of the roasted coffee originated in Arabia. Yet another fact about Ethiopia. The biblical Ark of the Covenant holding the 10 Commandments is believed to be housed in a church in Ethiopia. No one, not even the specially chosen guardian, is allowed to look to confirm that it's actually there. The person chosen to guard the Ark is never allowed to leave the church and stand guard over the elusive vessel, and a lifelong commitment that we could not even imagine. The life of solitude and diligent servitude to something that the world has revered for centuries is something that we can only aspire to. Even I can't stick to a New Year's resolution for more than a week. An alternative story about the origins of coffee has us believe that coffee was first discovered by a sheikh named Omar, disciple to the Sufi mystic. While in exile from Mocha, Omar, who was famous for his ability to cure the sick through prayer, lived in a desert cave near Osab. Somewhat hungry, Omar one day chewed some berries only to find them bitter. He roasted them, but this only made them hard. Finally, he tried boiling them, resulting in a fragrant brown liquid, which in an instant gave him unnatural and exceptional energy and allowed him to stay awake for days on end. His miracle discovery was held in such great awe, he was allowed to return home to Mocha and elevated to the sainthood while coffee percolated around the Arab world. How did we start adding milk to our coffee? Milk coffee is a category of coffee-based drinks made with milk. John Neuhoff, the Dutch ambassador to China, is credited with the first person to drink coffee with milk when he experimented with it around 1660. Coffee drinkers are less likely to contract deadly diseases. Studies have shown that patients with higher levels of caffeine in their blood were less likely to contract Alzheimer's disease. They also found that coffee had a positive result on type 2 diabetes patients and even protected women from skin cancer. Coffee decreases muscle pain, It is often advised you eat a high-protein breakfast after doing your morning cardio. However, adding a cup of coffee to your post-workout routine can decrease your muscle pain by 48%. That's pretty astounding. Dark roasts have less caffeine than light roasted coffee. The strong flavor of dark roasts tend to make us think that it's stronger, but that is actually not the case. Although the dark roasts taste better, light roasts have more caffeine in them since the actual roasting process burns off more caffeine. Adding cream to your coffee will prevent it from cooling faster. As it turns out, cream cools about 20% slower than black coffee, and by adding it to your coffee, you can keep it warm for a little bit longer than by simply drinking it black. Coffee, like alcohol, has a long history of prohibition, attracting fear and suspicion and religious disquiet and hypocrisy. Had the zealots got their way, there would not be very many coffee houses open today. Coffee drinking was banned by jurists and scholars meeting in Mecca in 1511. The opposition was led by the Meccan governor, Kher Beg, who was afraid that coffee would foster opposition to his rule by bringing men together and allowing them to discuss his failings. Thus was born coffee association with sedition and revolution. It was decreed sinful, but the controversy over whether it was intoxicating or not raged on over the next 13 years until the ban was finally rescinded in 1524 by an order of the Ottoman Turkish Sultan Selim, with Grand Mufti Mehmet Ebasud El Amidi issuing a fatwa allowing coffee to be drunk again. Beg was executed for his troubles by command of the Sultan himself, who further proclaimed coffee be sacred. Now there you have it, a man was killed over coffee. In Cairo, there was a similar ban in 1532. Coffee houses and coffee warehouses were ransacked. Coffee was known as the Devil's Cup. It did not take long for coffee to travel short distances to the European mainland, where it first landed in Venice on the back of a lucrative trade the city enjoyed with its Mediterranean neighbors. Initially, however, coffee was met with the suspicion and religious prejudice it had suffered in the Middle East. The word on the street filtered back from the intrepid European travelers to the mysterious and mystical lands of the East was that equally mysterious, exotic, and intoxicating liquor caused trouble. To Catholics, it was a bitter invention of Satan carrying the whiff of Islam, and it seemed suspiciously like a substitute for wine as used in the Eucharist. In any event, it was outlawed. Such was the consternation that Pope Clement had to intervene. He sampled the coffee for himself and decreed that it was indeed a Christian as well as Muslim drink. On tasting it, he wittily declared, "This devil's drink is so delicious, we should cheat the devil by baptizing it." From then on, coffee has been dubbed the devil's drink or the devil's cup. England's first coffee house was established in Oxford in 1650 at the Angel in the parish of St. Peter in the East by the Jewish gentleman named Jacob, in a building now known as the Grand Café. London's first coffee house opened in 1652 in St. Michael's Alley near St. Michael in Cornhill's churchyard. It was grown by Pasquale Rosé, a Greek man who in 1672 also set up a coffee stall in Paris. By 1675, there were more than 3,000 coffee houses in England alone. Some even had bed and breakfasts for overnight guests. Known as schools of the wise, coffee houses became known for fostering stimulating conversation. They were places for learning about the state of the world and enjoying everything from music and dance to chess and debate. An implicit threat to religious gathering places, which is why it caused such a kerfuffle as it made its way around the world. You could almost say that coffee houses are the internet of today. This led to the fact that coffee is blamed for England's absentee husbands. As men, instead of being home with their families, they were in the coffee houses discussing news, philosophizing, and, well, being men. Women were not allowed. Coffee cultivation then spread to the Americas. The first coffee seedling planted in the Americas was carried by ship from the Royal Botanical Garden in Paris to Martinique around 1723 by a young naval officer named Gabriel Declue. This one coffee plant is credited with the growth of more than 18 million offspring on the island over the next 50 years, beginning the crop's fruitful yet fraught Caribbean and Central American history. The coffee industry in Brazil, now the world's #1 coffee producer, began with a few seedlings poached from French Guiana by Francisco de Melo Paleta. When the French governor refused the Portuguese military members' initial request to share, Legend has it that Paletta was able to captivate the governor's wife by using his good looks and received her bouquet upon leaving, with what would become Brazil's first coffee seeds buried inside. Scandalous. The French pushed colonial coffee production to its breaking point, though. The French started growing coffee on their territory of Santo Domingo in 1734 using African slave labor, and by 1788, the Caribbean island was responsible for half the world's supply. The harsh working conditions of the coffee and the sugarcane plantations, combined with the French legislature's inaction on slavery or civil rights appeals, eventually culminating in the Haitian Revolution, fought from 1791 to 1803. Saint Domingo, now Haiti, ceased to be a major coffee producer following its declaration of independence in 1804. Coffee production then expanded through Central America and into Mexico. Coffee cultivation spread like wildfire through the New World's tropical locales in the local 18th and 19th centuries, reaching Costa Rica in 1779, Mexico in 1790, El Salvador in 1840, and Guatemala in 1850. Global exports of the region's roasted coffee got an additional boost in 1914 with the opening of the Panama Canal, enabling an easy access to coffee plantations along the Pacific for the very first time. Coffee actually replaced beer as Europe's breakfast beverage. One of the odder accusations lobbed at coffee from a modern perspective was that it would hurt society by making people drink less alcohol. At the time, beer and wine were the default breakfast beverages throughout Europe, and coffee presented an appealing alternative that would help people begin a day alert and energized. One Prussian king didn't take kindly to this cultural shift. In 1777, Frederick the Great issued a manifesto proclaiming beer superiority to coffee, reportedly complaining of the money that goes out of the country in consequence. To encourage domestic beer sales and raising children on beer soup, just like His Majesty, Frederick imposed a number of restrictions on coffee and hired 400 disabled soldiers as sniffers to track down unsolicited roasters. The restrictions were lifted after his death in 1786. So let's just backtrack a minute and visit the fact that we fed our kids beer soup for breakfast at that point. Another ill-fated attempt to eradicate the menace of coffee drinking began under Swedish ruler Gustav III in the late 1700s. Two identical twins had their death sentences commuted to life imprisonment on the condition that one of them drink 3 pots of coffee and the other 3 pots of tea every day from then on. The king was assassinated in 1792 before he could see his experiment's final results. But, to let you know, the tea drinker died first. Drinking coffee becomes patriotic after the Boston Tea Party. Though coffee houses had been introduced, tea remained the beverage of choice throughout Britain's American colonies until the British Tea Party of 1773. Planned in a Boston coffee house called the Green Dragon, the act of protest against the Crown's tea tax drove large swaths of patriotic colonists, including John Adams, to start their mornings with coffee instead of tea, a shift in preference that endures to this day. Did you know that the New York Stock Exchange was actually created in a coffee house? It wasn't just philosophical books and radical revolutions that sprung from coffee houses as the hub of ideas. In the United States, the New York Stock Exchange started out trading in the now closed Tontine Coffee House from 1792 to 1870. Similarly, after months of discussion, the Bank of New York was decisively established to serve the city's shipping industry at St. George's Square Coffee House in June of 1784. A folk music revival and influx of espresso-sipping Italian immigrants during the Beat Generation era of the 50s and 60s helped bring coffee houses to the forefront of American life, and generations renewed interest in high-quality specialty brews. Alfred Peet is known as the grandfather of the gourmet coffee craze for founding Peet's Coffee and Tea in Berkeley in 1966, which grew from one Bay Area retail outlet to a chain of more than 150 stores across 10 states. Peet, also credited with mentoring the founders of Starbucks, among other major coffee entrepreneurs, now the world's most popular coffee brand. Starbucks started with a single Seattle storefront in 1971 and was bought in 1987 by Howard Schultz, who nationalized the business.